Which did you work on with Fearless Flyers?
I did Fearless Flyers 4.
Cool. What's good, everybody? Scoobert Dubert here for Love Music More. I'm so excited for this conversation with Noam Wallenberg. Let me list off some of his credits right now. Vulfpeck, Fearless Flyers, A$AP Rocky, Alan Parsons, Mac Miller, Anderson Paak, Dee Snider. I really should have talked to him about Twisted Sister because I interviewed JJ French. You know, I remember this now, but we talk so much about Vulfpeck and the Fearless Flyers that, there's only so much time in the world. But I really think you're going to enjoy this conversation. We talked about mixing, mastering, production, working with different artists, coming in at different parts of their careers and trying to elevate or change or confront new challenges like live records and what you actually have to do on the back end when there's bleed from every mic because you have a really loud drum kit and then singers that are moving to and from the microphone so it's really close and then it's really far away. And you as a mixing engineer are trying to fiddle all of the knobs so that the listener never gets distracted and never gets pulled out of the action. So a great conversation with Noam. Before we get to that, I'd love to introduce our title sponsor, DistroKid. DistroKid makes music distribution fun and easy with unlimited uploads, and artists get to keep 100% of royalties and earnings. I use it myself, and we have a code for you for 30% off. If you go to distrokid.com/VIP/lovemusicmore, you can get started today. 1 million plus artists rely on DistroKid to get their music onto Spotify, Apple Music, YouTube, TikTok, Tidal, Instagram, and all of the major streaming services. I love using it because I'm able to check all my stuff on the go. It's got a great app. I'm able to withdraw my royalties, check my lyrics, send split codes so that if I'm collaborating with somebody, they can hop on that track and easily get all of the money and the percentages that they are due. So check out DistroKid. You can use our link, support the show, and support your career at distrokid.com/VIP/lovemusicmore. Enjoy the conversation. Love music more. Love music more. Music more. Music more. Music more. What's good, everybody? Scoobert Dubert here. Welcome back to Love Music More, and I am joined with Noam Wallenberg. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, man.
So I'm so excited to talk to you about all things music production, your career arc, your journey. Before I do, I'd love to talk a little bit about Vulfpeck because that's one of my favorite artists, definitely an inspiration of mine, and some of the unconventional ways that you went about mixing and mastering that record. Not the traditional, just like check the box, do the thing. It's like really thinking like a musician at every step of the process. Could you just tell me a little bit about that approach?
Yeah, the Vulfpeck record that I did was a unique one in that it was a live record, meaning it was recorded live, but the intention to not bill it as a live record kind of at all. You know, typical live records are music that was recorded as studio recordings that then this is like another version of those songs. And this was very decidedly not that. These are original songs. This is the only recordings that are ever going to exist of them. There isn't going to be studio versions. These are the recordings. And the sound was, we were trying to make it so that you would kind of forget whether it was a studio record or whether it was a live recording. It was like meant to be ambiguous, meant to kind of get lost in those records and also kind of feel like, you know, some of the reference points that we were using was like a bunch of these old 70s funk records that were like highly polished. That is kind of the antithesis of live recordings. Like it's like super controlled, clean style of recording and mixing. You know, the usual game plan when you're recording, you know, when you're mixing a live record kind of went out the window, and also the usual thing of mixing a studio record kind of went out the window because all the, you know, a lot of the tools that I use when I'm mixing a studio record kind of couldn't be used in this scenario.
Could you explain to a listener that maybe doesn't, like they think like a live record like Frampton Comes Alive or something like that, you know, like with a crowd with an audience. Yes. What are some of the limitations? Are you talking things like bleed for listeners where a microphone is picking up the wrong audio source? What were some of the challenges? What held you back from doing that?
Yeah, so bleed is a big part of it. There's a lot of issues with bleed just because you have a big blaring bass amp on stage, and so every acoustic instrument is going to have a ton of bass, every vocal mic is going to have a ton of drums. Everyone is going to bleed together between the instruments. There is also massive speaker arrays that are playing this music out to the room, and there's an enormous kind of hall that they're recording in that has all sorts of reverberance and like a huge amount of length that it adds, particularly if you're making funk music, is like pretty outside of the world of like what that music usually sounds like. All these extra sounds that you're kind of fighting with. And then you're also dealing with all of the imperfections that come with this concert was very, very well recorded, but the drum tuning is not going to be quite as meticulous and precise as if the tuning's going to kind of go out throughout the show a bit. You're not tuning in between songs, of course. Like the placement on piano mics, for instance. I believe that I wasn't there. I wasn't there for the recording of this, but I think they stuck the mics inside of the upright and closed it.
Cool.
And I think they had some extra mics on it, but like largely it's these ways of recording that is like not typical of what you would do with a studio record. The other thing is like the way that people are performing is it's not tailored to the record. It's tailored to the live audience. Even if they intend for it to be tailored to the record, which they did, it's just like they're putting on a show. They're trying to get the energy right in the room. Yes. And so, things like vocalists are running around and they're on handheld mics. So it's like the distance is constantly changing dramatically as far as where the vocal mics are. The overall volume of like the way that they play is really, really different. That band records really, really quiet usually. Yeah,
right.
And it just doesn't, just playing stuff that quiet doesn't really work in a live setting. So it's just it's a very different beast. A lot of things like compression were kind of out the window in some ways for me. Like when I'm trying to get rid of drum bleed in vocal mics. If I'm trying to get rid of that,
how are you doing that with like gating or just careful EQ?
The trouble is that gating doesn't really work with that stuff because the bleed is so dramatic that the idea of like getting rid of it completely is not a possibility because you'll feel the mic disappear, right? There's certain things that I was able to do that with. Like sometimes I could do that with not really gating, but like I could chop out sections of like if the piano's not playing, I could chop out like that mic sometimes.
Rumble or like that
Tom Rumble, stuff like that I could kind of deal with. But like by and large, I had to kind of leave all the mics live because like it just would have felt very, very different. You would feel all of a sudden the atmosphere change if one of these mics was going in and out all the time. I had to leave it in, but like really all you can do is the vocalist is moving the mic around. I can't compress that mic really because if I compress it, not only does it levels out the vocals, but it means every time the vocalist isn't singing, all of a sudden, however much compression I do, that is how much louder the drums are in every vocal mic.
Makes sense.
So the answer is just like tons and tons of this like really meticulous volume writing. It's mostly there's very little compression on the record. It's mostly just volume writing and things of that nature. There's a lot of like musical like choices that were technical choices that I had to make that I then justify musically in some ways.
Okay.
So like there's a shitload of bass bleed in the piano mics.
Yeah.
There was nothing I could do about that.
Yeah.
And so the only thing that I could do was like filter the piano mics pretty dramatically and like make it kind of a thinner piano sound, which, like that's a choice that I made that I'm like, okay, the piano is going to take up these frequencies. Piano is going to take up this sonic space and I have to make all the other instruments make that choice make sense from a musical perspective. I didn't have a choice of whether or not that's going to happen. That has to happen because otherwise the bass is going to sound insane on this record. But if the piano is going to be thin,
that's where a lot of the coolest musical decisions of like history come from is either like 100%. Limited resources or like crap, we deleted that microphone, we didn't record that thing on that take. We got to roll with it. Like I think I saw a video of you doing mismatched overheads on a drum kit.
Yeah, just recently.
That's really cool. I haven't seen that before, but I was like, that feels like one of those little light bulb moments. It's like, oh yeah, you can color outside of that box.
That's that shit that I particularly with drums, like when I'm producing records in particular, like I really love just like making choices that are for the sake of being different,
Hmm.
painting myself into a corner, and then trusting that I'm going to figure out a way to fight my way out of it. And like
Yeah.
what comes from that is a more interesting thing than if I made my life easier.
I like that.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah, and it forces character, and like you're saying, just like that idea with the scooped out piano. It's like, okay, now I need to not make that sound like oh, I have to do this, or this is the way it is, I guess. You have to make it sound like it's a bold, interesting choice in the same way that you're making that bold, interesting choice as a producer. You're applying some of that producer mentality to the mix side, which I think is kind of part of the secret sauce of my favorite mix engineers, is they're willing to go there. They're not just, oh, I just polish things. They're like, and some of my favorite mastering engineers have this kind of mentality too, of like, I see the end product. I see what you're going for. Let's take it there with whatever tools I have.
You know what's so funny is I relate to that so much mixing wise. There's records that I am just the mastering engineer. There's records that I'm just the mixing engineer. There's records that I'm producing and playing all the instruments and writing the songs with the artist. Like I do a lot of different kind of roles in the records that I work on, and I don't look at them differently most of the time. Like if I'm producing a record and I'm mixing the record, generally by the time I start mixing the record, it's almost mixed. Like as I'm producing it, it mostly gets mixed as it goes, and it's never happening where I'm just like completely taking it in a different direction. Like it's all kind of an extension of the same thing.
A question for me though, gain staging. How's your gain staging? That's something I always struggle with, is like, how much do I deal with that during the production side, or do I go I get all my palette or whatever and then get to the mix and then start gain staging more?
So I guess it depends how technical you want to get on. I don't know how technical you like to get on this on the podcast, but
I think that part of what's missing in the music conversation is that middle space of technical, but not so technical that now we're talking electrical engineering.
Wouldn't be able to anyways. So.
Yeah, exactly, me either. So I just feel like I'll be the advocate of the unknowing masses, because I don't know that much.
Awesome. So I'll tell you this: when I'm recording, my gain staging is all based on what the gear that I'm working with is doing, right? Because it's the gain staging in that colors the sound, and sometimes I want to hit preamps quieter, and sometimes I want to hit them really hard, and it's all just about the stuff that gets recorded. Once I'm either in the box or at a tape or whatever, I get into my final gain staging like pretty quickly. I have a mixing template that I work in that is kind of over time has become my production template, and it's a constantly changing thing. Like it's every couple weeks it's changing in some capacity, just as I'm getting I'm constantly trying stuff and getting inspired and also getting like in love with certain plugins or processes, and also getting like simultaneously disgusted by other things that I've been doing for it's just like I'm very manic with what I get inspired by.
I understand. Yep.
Whatever my mix bus is for that project, or either just whatever it happens to be that week, or whatever I'm kind of deciding it's going to be for that record, I have it in pretty much at the beginning.
Cool.
And as soon as we start recording stuff, I start funneling everything through that mix bus and bringing things into my template. And my mix bus is something that I'm like super intimately familiar with how the gain staging works in it. So like the first thing on my mix bus is often a compressor of some sort. Mm-hmm. And, I cycle through probably 4 or 5 different compressors that I like in that spot. Yeah. And I have settings on all of them that I'm like, when I get my drums and bass cooking, they should be barely touching this.
Yes.
And they should just start the needle moving, right?
Right.
And generally, if I kind of get that working, all of my other gain staging, just to make sense musically, like it's like, obviously the balance is going to be different on every record and on every thing, but it's like generally it's not that different. So it's like usually if I do that, my vocals are going to, if my vocals in relation to my drums are going to be within 5 decibels of each other, right? So through all of that, all of my gain staging of everything just makes sense. And my choice is a technical one right at the beginning of just where is my structure? I don't know enough about structures. Whatever the first thing you put up in a structure, right?
Like the steel beam
one
right in the middle.
joist or whatever the fuck.
It's the backbone.
one beam, and then everything else I'm building around that beam, and whatever the height of that beam, that's the height of the building, and everything else is going to kind of make sense around it. I'm never really getting to the place where I'm like, shit, my whole thing is getting way too loud, and I need to turn the whole thing down, or it's like the troubles that people get into with gain staging, where like stuff just gets out of hand, and then they don't know how to fix it without upending the whole way that their thing works,
I learned that the hard way.
Everyone learns that the hard
way. I've got some big news, everybody. My vinyl record is out. We didn't make a ton of these, so these guys are going to sell out, and I would love for you to get your hands on one of them because they're so dope. They're so dope. And it comes with a whole bunch of like liner notes and pictures and special stuff, the things that really went into making this record. And I want you to get your hands on it. So go to scoobertdubert.pizza or check out my Instagram for a link, or click the link in the show notes or the bio or wherever you're watching this to pick up your copy. They're going to sell out. We really did not make very many of these, and I want you to have it. It's like a collector's item. So thank you for supporting my music, and I can't wait for you to hear it actually on physical vinyl. Enjoy the rest of the episode.
There's very successful people who never learn
that's true.
Let me deal with it when I get it, which is perfectly fine as well. Like my mixing and my producing is like very much one process.
Cool.
When I'm doing both, it's like and I kind of think of it in terms of like it's all music making, obviously. Mm-hmm. Like music making in many ways can be problem solving a lot of the time. Like there's a lot of periods of the process of making music, which is like this moment doesn't feel right to me, and trying to figure out what this emotional response that I'm having to the things that I'm hearing, and how to make myself feel this other. I want to feel this, and it feels so bad when that chorus hits because it doesn't feel this thing. And like there are lots of issues that you can have within a song that can be solved through either mixing or production or both, right? Like it's like, you have a chorus that doesn't hit. It's like oftentimes you can mix the elements that you have in a way that are going to make it feel as full as you want it to feel. You could also add an instrument to add intensity to that.
Agree.
It's different tools, but it's like the same kind of, it's from the same tool chest. Like it's all kind of meant to do the same things. And the only thing that I don't get into in that process is mastering, which the process of mastering is something that like when I'm mixing a record, I fully incorporate it into the mixing. I want my mastering to be as uncreative as it possibly can generally. And that's like just there's again, tons of people have completely different philosophies, and there's so many. I forget who is someone was just telling me about a record that they did where they were like they weren't totally convinced on the mixing, and then like it went to mastering, and it was like holy shit, it came back and it was like incredible, it was perfect. And I genuinely it doesn't make any sense to me how someone could do that, because I'm like, how do you make it perfect once you have all of the control taken away from you?
I'll give you at least my examples. I know I work with the same mastering engineer like 99% of the time. I know what he's going to do, and I can do it, but I know he's going to do it, and he has a better listening environment than I do.
Yes.
I leave a little bit more room in all respects, like master, two bus, EQ. I pretty much steer clear for like a lot of these little things. I just basically just leave that naked. Even my bus compression is like pretty light, like you're saying. And so I give him headroom, I give him mixing room, and he knows what I like. I know what he does. I know what his room sounds like. I know what my room sounds like. And so it's almost like I could backfill. If when I work with people I don't trust or I don't know, I'll go way further. I'll box them into the little corner that I want them in, you know?
Sure.
But with my guy, sometimes he surprises me. And since I play all the stuff, what it's like. You do like 100% of the things. It's like I want to leave at least 2% for somebody else to collaborate on it a little bit.
Do you like ever put mastering stuff on your stuff? Just like, just to get a sense of what it's going to do?
Totally.
Then you're pretty much doing it. Like, I think that the truth is that like mastering is I don't know, man. I oscillate between feeling like mastering is like. I'm trying to figure out a not inflammatory way to say this.
Do it. This is a podcast. You want to be inflammatory on a podcast.
A bunch of the like wizard stuff about mastering is bullshit.
I love it. Yes.
Is bullshit. It's meant to make people feel like they can't do things themselves, and like it's like these special pieces of equipment or these special.
Yeah.
I think the only thing that's truly special about mastering is the room and the person's ears. It's just their experience and the room that they're working in. You know, there's special pieces of gear, but like I would pretty much bet money that like any mastering engineer that you love, if you give them like a fucking stock Pro Tools plugins, they could probably make something happen that you're gonna love.
Exactly.
Like, it's like, you know, like it's mostly about how people are using that stuff. And I feel like the best thing that people can do is stick a limiter on their shit and just, you know, they don't have to do it the whole time, but like listen to something with a limiter slammed to like to the volume that they want it to ultimately be at. Because the truth is like, if you stick whatever, an L2, you know, the basic L2 on your master bus and you crank it, it's like, it's 90% of the way to whatever your mastering engineer is going to do. That's the truth. I'm not from an EQ standpoint, of course, but like,
I understand.
From a dynamic control standpoint, like it's most of what mastering is in a dynamic control sense is very refined ways of limiting things, essentially. Like, you know, and that could be through multiple stages of limiters or compressors or clipping or all these different things.
You're going to make the whole thing louder. Like, let's be
You're going to make the whole thing louder, but it's like, it's not that fucking different than just sticking an L2 on. It is like...
I understand what you're saying, though.
But you know what I'm saying.
So you're paying for the person, and like, and really what I'm doing is I'm paying for that gut check of like that final person that's heard my entire career arc for him to be like, yo, this mix is fire. It's like, okay, great. And like somebody that will tell me, this sucks, or like what happened to your bass, and that's a big chunk of what I'm paying for with my.
That is the best. The way that I started mastering was like I would get our artists to get budgets to pay like my heroes to master, my like mastering heroes to master stuff, and then I would just like take so deep advantage of the fact that I had paid them whatever $3,000, $4,000 to master this record that I felt like that entitled me to a conversation with them.
Exactly.
And it was on the expense of the artist or the label
smart.
I got to like, you know, just beg Greg Calby to like tear me apart, basically. Which is like, just tell me every little thing that you felt like wasn't right with this. And the way that I really learned to master was I would hire either like Greg Calby or Ted Jensen or Howie Weinberg, just all these like super top tier, heavy hitter mastering engineers. I would hire them to master these records for me. And then, but they're obviously well-earned, super expensive. And at the time they were charging, I think, you know, probably like an extra $100 a track to do any alternative versions. So the mastering might be a certain amount of money, and then it'd be like an extra $1,500 sometimes just to get instrumentals done.
Wow.
And so I would tell the artist, I would say like, let's spend the money on the mastering, and then don't spend the money on the instrumentals. Give me half of that. Yeah. And I'll do instrumentals. I'll master the instrumentals for you.
Totally.
And then I would reverse engineer their mastering to do the instrumentals.
Such a good idea.
And and just force myself to like figure out what you know, it's instrumentals. It's like, it's got to be pretty close. It doesn't have to be perfect, but it's like...
Yeah, the stakes are not there, but
the stakes are not there.
A/B testing basically in between your chain, their chain, the best in the world. It's brilliant.
Yes. And just, you know, I would do what I think I'm supposed to do, which is like stick a compressor on the master, right?
Right.
And then, the compressor would be doing like, you know, whatever, a decibel and a half of reduction throughout or whatever. And then I would get to the verse, and all of a sudden, my master was a decibel and a half louder than Greg Calby's. And I'd be like, okay. So it gets to the verse, and it's loud. You know, so that must mean that I'm doing no compression in the verse. I'm doing a decibel and a half of compression in the chorus.
Yeah.
So what it means is whatever I'm doing in the chorus, he's not doing any compression on this record. Right. Like just limiters or just, you know, like he's all these things that I think he's doing.
Yep.
I have evidence right here that he's not doing that
Yeah.
stuff, and that and also like I get a tom fill and I hear his, and I'm just like, oh fuck, like his feels so much cleaner, and I'm like, oh, he took all the low end out of the sides. So when my toms go there, it kind of centers the low end. Like all these things you can kind of reverse engineer just by hearing this stuff. So yeah, that was kind of my like unofficial education. Like I never interned under a mastering engineer or anything like that. I just kind of figured it out.
Well, that goes back to the gain staging conversation of, like, okay, I have this much room and I've overfilled it.
Yes.
And now everything's all screwed up and I basically have to start over because it's all messed up. Versus now I have a process. Now I build it around this thing. And guess what? Now it's easier to produce because you understand where things can be placed. You understand how much room you have. You're like, I can fill this whole room with cement now. But before I had the scaffolding, I had no idea that this space even existed. But then it also applies to unique creative challenges. Like the live situation is you're honing that way of thinking. And now you're applying it in not just mastering, but you're applying it across all of these unpredictable challenges. Just like you're saying that musical problem solving is like you're developing your taste. You're developing your ability to apply yourself to whatever problem arises. And that's really cool.
Sure. Yeah, that makes total sense.
I wanted to ask about Fearless Flyers. Which did you work on with Fearless Flyers?
I did Fearless Flyers 4.
Cool.
Going to be working on the new one a bit.
Nice.
As well. I don't know if anything is announced, but
awesome.
Whenever something comes out, I'll be working on that too.
Very, very cool. Very, very cool. Recording, mixing?
I'm not recording. I'm
Cool.
going to be mastering the new one.
Mastering the new one. Awesome.
Yeah.
It's really exciting. Really love Nate Smith's drumming in particular.
Monster.
Absolutely magical. I wanted to ask you about that mmany transients. For the listeners, transient attack, whatever. There's so much going on in that music. And everything's important. I just would love for you to opine on that just a little bit. Like, what's that like?
Yeah. It's how all of the instruments are like kind of transient, right? Because Nate is hyper transient in himself.
Exactly. And then you've got like Corey doing like intense funk. Like, everybody's playing a bunch of notes and they're all important and they're all pretty dry. And I just feel like that creates such an interesting modern pop problem because like I could picture how you would do that in like the 70s. Or something, but then applying it to digital audio where everything is pristine. Or I'm just curious how that works. Are things being bounced down to tape? What is the blend of analog, digital? How are you dealing with like instrumental music? That's just it seems like a challenge.
So the Fearless Flyers record, that record came from me working on that record.
Okay,
came from two records that I did. A record called "Anyways" by May Earlywine. She's like an incredible singer-songwriter, just amazing. And it was a record with her and Woody Goss, who Woody plays keys in Vulfpeck. Fantastic. Actually, she just dropped a record that's produced by Theo.
Hey,
Katzman.
sweet, awesome.
So she's killing. But I did a record with her, and I did a record with Woody that was like called a Vulfie Christmas. That was kind of like
I heard this.
It was like our version of like Vince Guaraldi Peanuts Christmas music. Yeah. Both records we did live to 8-track tape.
Cool. Okay.
Yep. And both of them, we did it in hyper restrictive. Actually, I say 8-track, but my 8-track, one of the tracks is busted on. So it was really 7-track tape. And we were kind of purposefully making that process restrictive. And the drums it was 2 drum mics that would get bussed down to one channel. And I'd have one channel that was all the drums and mono piano because we didn't have enough channels to do stereo piano. And it was just like stuff like that to just make things interesting and also like make our process simplified. The result was like everything came together so easily for us, right? There's something about simplifying all this stuff and also of the commonality of everything going to the same tape machine and being able to hit tape hard and all this stuff that like just really made that experience so good for us. And so Jack heard those 2 records and was like, okay, I want to have something like this involved in our world. So based off of that, he's like, whatever you did to those records, can I send you a Fearless Flyers record and can you do what you did to those records to the Flyers, right?
Yeah.
And so that's exactly what I did. He recorded that at the Blue Note in New York.
Yeah.
And Live Guy recorded, and then I took those tracks. It was more than 7 tracks, obviously, but I took them and ran them 7 tracks at a time through that 8-track machine. essentially
So
gave
good.
it exactly that thing.
How'd you pick
There's
which seven? How'd you pick which seven?
Admittedly, I was on more than 7. I think I probably ended up on 14 tracks on that record, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
I think the drums were 7. The thing that I can't do is like the tape machine's not perfect. So anything that's a direct phase issue, I can't really.
Could you explain to listeners about just the craziness that is drum microphones and what phases and like how all of that has to go into your mind for mixing?
I could talk forever about it.
All right, you got maximum 5 minutes. Let's keep this tight.
Please stop me. The basic concept of phase is just how multiple microphones work together, right? The simplest is like 2 microphones on the same source. You have 2 microphones on a kick drum, for instance, and the microphones are going to be slightly different, the waveforms that come from them, based on the place that the mics are and based on the polarity, like when the kick drum hits, whether the first arc of voltage is either positive or negative. Based on a few of those factors, when a kick drum hits and you have 2 microphones on it, they are either working together to move air in the same direction at the same time, or they're in opposite directions to move air, and they are effectively fighting with each other.
Like noise-canceling headphones.
Exactly like noise-canceling headphones. They're either doing that within 2 speakers, like they're either doing that within the air and messing with it kind of has a sound that is like off-putting, or they are doing it within voltages, either like in analog settings or in digital settings, where they fight with each other, and whatever the outcome of the fight is comes out of the speakers and usually sounds substantially shittier or thinner or less present because of the fact that these microphones are not moving air in the same direction at the same time. That's the basic concept. And when you're recording a drum set with, in this case, 7 microphones, but often 10, 20 microphones sometimes, maximizing a huge part of getting drums to sound great is making it so that when the important elements of the drum set hit, as many microphones as possible are trying to work together to move air in the same direction at the same time. And that can be a kind of challenging process because moving a mic a couple inches can sometimes completely change what that equation is. In the case of me dumping these drums to tape, the phase issues are less so of like exactly, the relationships between the mics, and more so about if you take 2 microphones that are meant to be the same sound source and you have the time of them moving slightly, which is what happens on a tape machine, right? A tape machine, even if you have a really, really great motor, there is slight variances in terms of the speed. The speed is basically constantly getting slightly slower and then catching up and getting slightly. So usually you get to the finish line at roughly the same time, but it generally has these slight variances. And usually those slight variances don't really matter because you have one tape machine and everything goes on that one tape machine. And so even though there's a little bit of variances, it all happens together. So you don't notice it. It doesn't really matter. But if you take one overhead on one tape machine and another overhead on another tape machine, those variances are not going to happen together. And what's going to happen is you're going to get what is essentially a phaser, right? And that's or a flanger, where the first flanging came from is people taking exactly the same recording, sticking it on 2 tape machines, trying to get it as close as possible where they play back at exactly the same time. And then they just naturally, slowly get a tiny bit out of phase with each other and start to do these, comb filtering, resonance, sweepy stuff. That's the basics of what I said. So that's the drums all had to go to one tape machine essentially. That's a super long answer for like the drums had to be on 7 tracks. Yeah, and then I think the rest of the band was on another seven tracks. I believe. Cool. That's I didn't answer your question.
No, but you did in part. Stuff. Tape. What tape can do to transients can be very pleasant and help wrangle some of that just through the magic of that saturation and the ways that slamming into tape seems to help.
It's really interesting because it's all the previous Flyers records and all the previous Vulfpeck records, pretty much every single one was mixed by Jack Stratton. And Jack is a great mixer and has a really, really unique style of it's part of what people love about those bands is the way that those records sound. We went into both the Flyers record and the Vulfpeck record with the intention of not having it exactly that. Like, there's a reason that he hired me to do it, right? And it was just trying to do something different for these records.
Yeah.
And the way that his records feel and the way that his transients feel, like everything feels kind of squashed in a cool way, and all the dynamics are really, really intensely controlled. Like, you know, that's the Vulf compressor that he uses a bunch. It's so intense, the compression, which is part of what makes it really unique and cool. You stick that on a snare drum, every single snare drum is exactly the same volume, basically. You can have a 20 decibel difference in terms of how you're playing it, and all of those things are basically the same volume, right? And that's what makes it so intimate and interesting and unique sounding, is like that compression is controlling those dynamics in this intense way. But the records that he was like kind of referencing for like how he wanted, you know, these two new records to feel, was a bunch of these records that like obviously were built before that compressor existed, right, but also were made at a time when like compression was just less of a trend in particularly in drum sounds. Like I think on the Fearless Flyers, he was listening to a bunch of George Benson Breezin', nice. Right? Which is like such a great sounding, such a great sounding record.
Absolutely.
But it was, I believe it was recorded by and mixed by Al Schmidt, who's like,
oh my god,
who's like, you know, he's like the big band guy. Like he's like, compression is not what he's known for at all.
Right.
And you listen to those records and they don't feel very compressed. But I chose to like have my tape machine kind of be my compressor, right? And like even though tape compression is called compression, it's a really different process than compression, right? And it does shape the transients, but in a very, very different way. It does not change the character. It can make it feel like you're listening to a different song. Even. You know what I mean? Like it can add this urgency that like it really, really changes the intention of the player in a very sometimes incredibly compelling way. But in a way that like you don't really hear on some of those older records.
Totally.
And that you know, that's part of the genius of Jack, is like making the feeling of nostalgia while using almost none of the tools of what made those records sound like it's almost like he's just willing this feeling of nostalgia just through pure aesthetic, but it's like all of the tools and choices are totally unique to him. Like they're not 70s choices. It's just the way that he is hearing that stuff that makes it like a cartoon version of like a memory of what records sounded like in the 70s or something. It's like the way that he mixes.
Sorry to interrupt this very important broadcast, but it's time for one more advertisement for myself for this podcast. What I'm asking for is for you to rate it 5 stars, share it with your friends. This is like the most important thing for this podcast to grow. So if you want to do this, you go onto the podcast screen, right? You click on the ... on Spotify. Under there, it says rate show, and you go and you click it 5 stars. If you could do that for me, that's the best way for the algorithms, all this stuff, to share it out with the world. I know that it's a lot to ask, but if you could please just hit those 3 dots and then a 5 star, it would really help us out and helps us, you know, get the word out and spread the love of music. So thank you. If you're listening on YouTube, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Thank you so much, and here's the rest of the episode.
So regardless, he's doing this like this memory of that, and like I'm kind of doing like a memory of what he does. Like I'm trying to make something that like you don't notice that I'm using completely different tools than what he does, but still gives the feeling of like this Vulfpeck universe, this Fearless Flyers universe. So the tape saturation was like everything. It was all of it, basically. So most of what I was doing was tape saturation.
And I love how you're bringing in that Al Schmidt kind of ethos all the way back to all of the volume writing. You know, because
100%.
That's like the number one old school thing.
It's the number, like, and it's you know, it's not out of. I didn't want to. To be clear,
it's a bitch.
If I didn't have to, if I could have compressed that shit, I would have. It wasn't because I wanted to do it.
It's a lot more work.
It was so much more work. It was. I must have went through. I spent days volume, like truly.
Yeah, I believe it.
I spent a full day. The first thing I did was I booked out my studio and I spent a full day volume writing, mostly vocals, but like all the other instruments a bit as well, to tape. Like I did tape transfer. I mixed the project in Pro Tools, but I did tape transfers. First thing I did was just dumped everything onto tape, and I did volume rides, everything on the way to tape.
Way in.
So I on the way in, I did all these volume rides because I wanted to. Because I mean, that's like where the volume riding kind of originates from, is like people having to control the way that you have if you have a singer and their verse is 15 decibels quieter than their chorus.
Yeah.
And you're using Neve pre's that are staged, it's like it's not really a possibility. So you sit there with a fader, and if you just record it as is and you compress it after you've recorded it, it's like you end up with a noise floor that's 15 decibels louder in the verse than it is in the chorus, and you end up with a chorus probably that is completely distorting the tape machine, and a verse that's like not even touching it. It's just like the dynamics are so much more of a concern. And that's also my concern on this record was like I'm using a tape machine without noise reduction on it. So it's like I need to deal with that.
So you have more dynamics. Like when I'm in the studio, I lock in and my dynamics are pretty tight. Because I understand, like down the road, I'm going to create all these problems if I'm blowing out preamps or whatever.
That's the amazing thing of you mixing and playing all this stuff yourself, is like you deal with your own problems.
Right, exactly.
So you have to, it completely changes the way that you play as an instrumentalist. 100%.
Totally. But then when you get live, you can't really like do all of that anymore.
You're fighting for your life out there.
Exactly.
You're absolutely, man.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's like particularly the vocals, like it's and also handheld mic. Like if you're,
I can only imagine
if you have a really sensitive U47 and you're a foot away from it and you move a couple inches further or closer, like the change in volume is not that dramatic, and the change in proximity effect, like how much low end is in the voice, is not that dramatic. But if you have these handheld mics, like you're eating the mic, that's a different sound than if you're 3 feet away, and like it's the record is all of the above.
Right.
Everyone's doing everything because they're putting on a performance. Some of the only compression that I'm doing on those vocals is multiband. I'm doing a little bit of multiband stuff just to deal with the fact that the proximity effect is so variant in live vocals. I find that like particular, if you want live vocals, you're really trying to make them sound like a record. I haven't found really another way to deal with it other than multiband compression, because it's like the amount of low end is like sometimes it's like 8 decibels louder in a certain section than it is in another, just because of within a word, they're doing exactly the right thing, which is like working the mic, but it's like that creates all kinds of other variances in terms of the like frequency makeup of a vocal track.
Right. And those are the things that can pull you out of a mix. In the same way, watching a movie, they drop a frame or the coloring is wrong or whatever, and you suddenly realize, oh no, they're acting, this isn't real.
Yes. It's you get one thing that is like, oh, this is a microphone. This isn't someone singing straight to me. This is someone singing to a microphone, and then that is being projected to me. And like generally I want direct injection of most of those. Like I'm trying to take the process out of it and just make it feel like someone's in your head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love that. Great place for us to pivot to your personal music and kind of your production, like beyond obviously these Vulfpeck records, Fearless Fire records. That's super exciting, and really, I'm sure a lot of listeners are super excited about how you kind of took that torch and what you made of it. How do you apply, and how does that contrast with what you do for yourself, for your own music, and then also in your production world?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not a singer. So what I consider to be my music is generally music, like projects that I'm co-writing. I usually am taking some ownership with. Mm-hmm. My partner is a singer, Jennifer Hall, who is like, that's my biggest musical outlet right now that I consider to be my music is that stuff, right? We write all the music together. I produce all of it. I play most of the instruments on that stuff. A few hired guns, but it's mostly just like just the two of us sitting in a room and making
beautiful.
Her records, which she's incredible, and her music is like this kind of indie pop stuff that is super, super cool. I have a couple other like projects that I'm potentially putting my name on.
Ooh.
Possibly, I've never put anything out with my name on.
That's exciting.
On it. Woody Goss and I are working on like a duo record right now that I think
Amazing.
might end up being like a name project. It's yet to be either album or a bunch of single. We don't exactly know what we're doing with it, but we're making like instrumental music. Outside of that, I produce a ton of records. I would say about half of what I do is mixing and mastering, and half of what I do is like producing records for artists, and that varies pretty immensely as far as like what that means. And for a bunch of artists, that means the studio that I'm in right now is the studio in my house. Which is like a smaller production studio. And then I have a studio that I work at in town called Rack Tracks Recording, which is like a Chicago staple. It's been here for 30 plus years. And I've been there for more than half of that.
Wow.
About 16, 17 years I've been at that studio.
Amazing.
Artists come to either of those places, and sometimes it is just us. Artists with a song, voice memo or something like that, and we just make the song whatever that means, right? So sometimes that's me playing all the instruments, sometimes it's me and the artist playing a bunch of instruments, sometimes it's us hiring a band and vibing off of what everyone's bringing, or sometimes it is us making all the music in here and then replacing things with a live drummer. It's like there's so many different processes. Most of the time that brand of production that I do is this kind of like free, we're just here in a room making music, and whatever the fuck that means is what we're doing right now, and there's no restrictions as far as like we're trying to get this person on. It's like this. Oftentimes it's so there's a ton of records that I do that for, and then there's also records that I do that are a band, established a band or an artist that has a band that they play with or something like that, or already has parts, and in that role, I'm like kind of a curator and aesthetic guide. Yes. Like I'm kind of like trying to help, if there is a vision for the record, trying to help shepherd it and bring like the language into the choices of what we have to do to make that language happen. So if we're talking about, things that feel this way, I'm the one asking the questions of like, what do these instruments sound like? And also how do we get it there? And how do we pick the kit to make it and the drummer to make that happen? And then ultimately lots of times I'm the fifth band member, I'm the sounding board, I'm the like tiebreaker, I'm the I'm all and I'm the like person that the singer gets locked in a room with while the rest of the band gets kicked out, while we just like work through the emotions of where the song is coming from, and just all of these things that are like the nitty-gritty of truly what makes records happen is pretty much what I'm doing on a day-to-day basis with production.
Beautiful answer. So that brings me to my last question.
Yes.
This is the question that we ask every guest. So the show is called Love Music More. The segment's called Love Music Why. And the question's really simple. The answer can sometimes be really difficult. Why do you love music?
Fuck. I feel like I should have been prepared.
No, it's better if you're not. It doesn't have to be perfect. It can be the momentary answer. Like, why do you do this? Why do you keep waking up the next morning excited to do it again? Why do you do those volume faders?
Those volume faders, because I'm fighting for my life. I assume to most of your listeners, which is like, music had such a profound effect on me when I was growing up. Kind of my saving grace, and I don't know, I was terrible at school, I was terrible at sports, I was terrible at a lot of stuff, and music was kind of the one thing that like made sense to me, and also the way that I felt listening to certain records when I was young, like it truly shaped the way that I related to the world in such a I had my first heartbreak and I listened to the same record over and over, the same songs over and over again for weeks and weeks. And I remember, I can remember these moments of like hearing Paul Simon, Still Crazy After All These Years, for the first time on the CTA, and like there's one chord, when the drums come in, there's this minor chord, and I just like start bawling on the train. It's like figuring out what the fuck I'm crying, like what am I crying about? Like that's questions that like I don't know if I would have asked myself if I didn't have that song in that moment. So there's all these like immensely connective and profound moments that I had with music, and when I transitioned from being a music listener to being a music maker, the goal is just to be that for someone else. Like that's such a profoundly exciting thing to me, is like I get that still myself when I'm making the music. Like I'm my metric is trying to get those feelings. It's all feeling based. It's all just whether, how do you know that a production is done? How do you know that a song is done? It's like you get these feelings in your heart that make you feel like something is happening and make you feel like something is becoming bigger than just what you put into it. And every time that I make a record that someone I can tell that someone's having an experience that I had when I was younger, and also still have today, obviously, it makes me feel connected to the world when those moments happen. It's a similar feeling to, like, if you help your friend out, your friend is in a deep, tough emotional place and you talk them out of it or something like that. It's like there's something that feels giving but also definitely taking, like, without a doubt, when you help a friend out of something, you feel so fucking good about yourself the rest of the day, because you just feel purposeful and feel connected to the world and feel like you're kind of bringing something good into the universe in that moment. Probably my unhealthy addiction to that feeling is like feeling connected to the world, but I don't know. Does any of that make any sense at all?
Absolutely does. It absolutely does. And I love the idea of when music makes you feel that deeply, you almost feel that obligation to pay it back. Like,
yeah, I feel like that. I'm trying to not sound like it's a charitable thing. It's for me. I'm making things that are. I want to be clear. I'm not. My job is very fucking easy and enjoyable, and it was hard to get it, but it's really, really fun. And I'm mostly getting something out of it. I don't think that I'm doing something charitable or anything like that. It's deeply selfish, all of the music that I make, because I'm just having fun doing it. But
there you go. Now we have both sides. Now
we have both sides. I just want a fair and balanced take on that.
So where can people get in touch? Where can they find you? Where can they hear your music?
They could NoamWallenberg.com has a bunch of music up there, and then my Instagram is at Noam Wallenberg, and you can find me there.
Sweet. And I really want to hear that duo record, man.
Oh yeah, it's gonna.
Can't wait.
Something's gonna come out in the next year. I don't know when, I don't know what, but something's gonna come out.
I'll be pre-saving that, and I'll be jumping on it.
I love it, dude.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for chatting.
It was really, really nice to meet you, man.